Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about designing an effective PowerPoint presentation, particularly one for a professional setting like a business meeting or an academic conference. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the sort of mechanics of PowerPoint. I'm going to be talking about how to organize the material and how to set up slides so that they're effective and not distracting for viewers. So this presentation is going to cover a number of things. And actually, I want you to keep this slide in mind because we'll come back to this. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is designing clean, effective slides. And we'll talk about a number of different components of that. Then we're going to talk about ways to organize the presentation itself. Then we're going to talk about how to actually present well using a PowerPoint. And we'll talk about the 7 deadly sins. Now, that's not mine, but that's somebody else's. But these are great things to keep in mind as things specifically to avoid. And then I'll wrap up the presentation. So to start, designing clean, effective slides. One of the things that you want to be doing with this is to be consistent. You want your slides to have generally the same kind of look, feel, aesthetic, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason that this is important is because you want your audience to be concentrating on the content of the slides, or even better, the content of your presentation. And if each slide has a different color scheme, style, et cetera, font, whatever it is, then part of their brain power, even though it's a very subtle thing and it's going to be a very minimal amount of brain power that they need to devote to it, part of their brain power is going to go to how do I navigate this slide, as opposed to what's the content, what do I need to be paying attention to here. So you want to be generally consistent. Now, the layout of your slides may vary. That's totally fine. But some of the things that you want to do, you want to use a consistent background color. Now, I am actually going to show you how to do this. So if you go to design, which if you're using actual PowerPoint as opposed to Google Slides or something like that, Google Slides I don't use, so I'm not as familiar with it. But if you're using actual PowerPoint, which is what I recommend, you go to the Design tab, and then over here in the top right-hand corner, you'll see Format Background. I'm going to click out of that. I've got to move the little image of me here. So within this format background, you have the option. So let's say you wanted to put a picture or texture fill. You can do that. Use a subtle, not like distracting or overwhelming background. This sort of papyrus looking background is probably fine for most cases, but I tend to just use a solid fill. I tend to just use a solid background, and you can see that on my slides here. This is a sort of grayish blue, not super, super dark, but then once you've chosen the background that you want to click Apply to All, which is down here in the bottom right-hand corner, and that's going to make sure every slide has that same background. So back to the show. The next thing that you want to be thinking about is what style of background you actually want to use. Typically, you want something that's going to contrast with the color of text that you're using. I tend to favor lighter backgrounds with darker text. As you can see, again, I've got this sort of light bluish gray background with black text, but you can also do a dark background, say navy blue, with white text or lighter text, cream colored, light gray, something like that. But you want that contrast between light and dark with the background and text, and that's just about readability. That's very straightforward and pretty obvious, I think. The next thing that you want to think about is a consistent font. I've done another video about serif and sans serif fonts where I've talked about the benefits of choosing one or the other. But because PowerPoints are a digital medium, because they're something that your audience is going to read on a screen or a projector or whatever it is, I would typically recommend a sans serif font. So that's, you can see on the PowerPoint here, I've got, I think this is Century Gothic, which I quite like. There's a lot of sans serif fonts, but I like Century Gothic. It's fairly arbitrary. I don't see as much difference between most sans serif fonts as I do between serif fonts, but I have a refined palette. But ultimately, you want something that's readable and you want something that's appropriate. So if this is, say, a formal business meeting where you are pitching an idea that you want to sort of get money for or something like that, if you're presenting to shareholders or something like this, you don't want your presentation to be in Comic Sans, for instance. Use something professional, appropriate, readable. Very straightforward. In terms of transitions, so that's the switch between slides. If you use transitions, and they don't make much of a difference one way or the other, in my opinion. If you use subtle transitions, it's fine. It's not going to be distracting. And ultimately, that's the thing, is you want to avoid large scale you want to avoid large transitions that are really like flashy and showy, because they're going to distract your audience. The same thing with builds, which is one of the terms we have for these small transitions within slides. So if we look at this slide, for instance, I have a set of builds here. I have the initial slide, which you're seeing right now, but then each of these additional sets of text is a build. Use these sparingly. And again, you want to use fairly straightforward ones. I think fade is a really good one, but you want these kinds of effects to be very subtle, because otherwise they risk, again, distracting from the content of your presentation, which is really where you want your audience's attention. Also, the longer you go, the more you have in terms of transitions and builds and things like this, the longer the presentation stretches without adding any benefit to what you're saying or doing. So that's the first thing, consistency. The next thing, minimal text. This screen that you're currently seeing is terrible, terribly designed for a number of reasons. The main one being there's so much text here. There's way too many words on this screen. Readers are not going to read this. And if they are attempting to read it, then they're not paying attention to what you're saying. So this is a huge problem. Also, this gives us another design component. Steer clear, generally speaking, of red backgrounds and black text, or black text, or black backgrounds with red text. It gets very difficult to read. Blues, creams, grays, these are much, much more readable. So in terms of minimal text, this is something much closer to what you want for your slides. Typically, you want 5 words or fewer per line. That means you have to rely on keywords. And that's actually really important. And that's a good strategy, because you should not just be reading what's on the PowerPoint itself. You should be elaborating and explaining. And so the keywords are going to prompt you to remember what you want to talk about. And they're going to give your audience a core idea without necessarily having to have them read everything. And again, you want to make sure that your text is readable. That's really, really crucial. In terms of incorporating images, you generally want fairly minimal images, both in terms of within individual slides themselves. You want to avoid overcrowding. So I mean, I've seen slides with just collage of pictures on them, and the eye doesn't necessarily know where to go. We don't necessarily know what's most important. So just a few images, 2, 3, at most 4, if it's something like comparative charts or graphs or something like that. But you really want to use a minimal number of images per slide so that the audience can focus on those slides and actually understand the images. The same thing, you don't want just slide after slide after slide of images. So no more than 5 image heavy slides in a row. You want to use good quality images that actually convey information very quickly and effectively. This image that I've got here of the little confused guy looking at a PowerPoint symbol, this is not the kind of thing you want on a PowerPoint. But I'm an English person. I deal primarily in words and not in images. So this is what I've put here in terms of how you might incorporate an image. If this were a better image. You don't want to do things like clip art or generic images, things like this. You want to use crisp images that actually convey important information. I also suggest avoiding video and audio, not because it's not effective, because it actually can be. And I myself have created PowerPoints with video clips incorporated. The problem with video and audio in a PowerPoint is that often there are technical issues with them. I've done online PowerPoint presentations with video where the audio didn't come through for my audience. It only came through on my side. And actually, I figured out that was because I was wearing headphones. And so when I tried the presentation again without headphones, the audio was audible to my audience. But that's a thing that's worth noting. That's where a lot of people trip up in these presentations, is they try and incorporate video or audio, and then there are tech problems that they have. So that's worth noting. And then the last thing with images, you want to make sure you are labeling your images so that your audience knows what they are. I've seen a lot of presentations, especially student presentations, where they will put up just a chart with almost no labels on it. If all we're seeing on screen is a pie chart, that is not visually doing much work for you. Even if you explain what that pie chart means, which you absolutely should do, having labels on that to tell us what the different parts of that chart represent is going to make that visually a lot easier for audiences. The other thing, and that actually applies both in terms of give us an overall description of the image. So like if it's a pie chart from a survey that you've done, let's say, label it survey results of X question or whatever it is. And then on the image itself, label the different parts so we know what they represent. But then the other thing in terms of labeling images is that if this is not an image that's yours, if you didn't create it, you should include a citation. And all of the major academic citation styles, MLA, APA, Chicago style, et cetera, have guidelines for how to label images. So that's something you should become familiar with. So that's images. Moving on to our next portion of this presentation, we're going to talk about how to organize the presentation itself. So the first thing is you want to begin with a title screen. And if I go back out, ta-da! So this is a title screen. Not the most inspiring or interesting title screen in the world, but there it is. Skipping slightly forward again, the next thing is going to be a table of contents or an agenda. Again, boom, this presentation will cover these things. Now, the reason that those two things are useful. So So the title screen, obviously, this is the thing that you want to start with. Typically, when you are presenting, your PowerPoint will go up slightly before you start talking. So that may be someone introducing you, that may be you introducing yourself before the beginning of your presentation, et cetera, et cetera. You want to give your audience something visual, something there to look at. Plus, this gives information. The title screen should typically have, at a minimum, the title of the presentation, your name. If there's a particular context, like if you are presenting at an academic conference or something like that, you would put also the name of that conference, et cetera, et cetera. You might put some sort of image that's going to hold the audience's attention as well. So you want to start with that because again, that's what people are initially going to see. That's their first impression of your presentation. Then the table of contents or an agenda. This is one is useful because it helps audiences orient themselves within the overall presentation, but it's not absolutely crucial. So if you leave out the table of contents, that's okay. Again, it's something that's beneficial for your audience, but if it's not there, often audiences can still follow through a presentation, particularly if it's fairly concise. So those are the two initial things. Then once you get into the body of the presentation itself, you kind of want to think about this like an essay. So you want to bring all of your rhetorical and composition skills to creating this presentation. So you're moving logically through ideas. This is the key thing here, is you want to figure out how you're structuring this presentation. And actually, that's another way that a table of contents can be useful to you, because it helps you figure out how you want to organize things. But one of the things you want to do, maybe the first thing that you want to do in terms of figuring out the organization for your presentation, is determine your purpose. Are you trying to persuade your audience of something, to convince them? Are you trying to inform them? Are you trying to educate them about something? Are you trying to request funds? What is it that you're trying to do? Because that purpose is going to guide the way that you approach organizing ideas. Along with that, you want to think about what information audiences need to know at different points in the presentation. So that's very, very important, obviously, in the same way it is with an essay. What do I need to know? What does a reader or a viewer or a listener need to know in order to make sense of what I'm saying at a particular moment? Very standard stuff here. Typically, you want to use a minimal number of slides. And in a way, think about the slides like paragraphs. Each key idea of your presentation should probably get its own slide. Again, you want a minimal number of slides. Some people recommend moving one slide per minute, but I think that's a very arbitrary approach. It really depends on the way that you choose to present. But again, the less slides that you have, that's less stuff your audience needs to visually focus on, and more they can pay attention to what you're saying, which should really be the core of the presentation anyway. One thing you definitely want to do is learn to navigate backwards and forwards in a presentation. People will often ask to see something from earlier in the presentation. Either because they missed it or because they want to go back and recheck something that you've said or something like this. So the easiest way probably to do this is the forward and back arrows. You can't see this, but on my keyboard here, if I press, this is upside down, but this is the back arrow. If I press back, it goes back, back, back. Lovely. And then forward, forward, forward. The other thing that people often do to move forward is press enter, and that works too. But you can't press enter to go back. So the back key works. The other thing is down in the bottom corner here, there will typically be a set of little buttons. The back button goes back, the forward button goes forward. Shocking, I'm sure. So those are some of the ways to do this. but you want to become familiar with how to navigate backwards and forwards. Also, the other thing is I've seen some computers or computer setups where there's a remote, and that'll often have a backwards and forward button, so you can click forward and backward via remote, which is really useful if you don't want to have to be stuck at a computer or a keyboard or whatever it is through your whole presentation. So how do you actually present well with a PowerPoint? There's a number of key things, and there's a lot of advice out there about this. But some of the key things for me are, you want to make sure that you're speaking to the audience and not to the screen. This is a thing a lot of people have experience with, either doing themselves, unfortunately, or seeing. This is also a stereotype of how bad professors teach, is you just sort of stare at the screen and read what's on the PowerPoint rather than actually talking to the audience. And the audience, again, is the key thing here. You want to make sure that you are addressing them and engaging them. Part of this is going to involve elaborating on the slides. So again, you're not just reading what's there, you are presenting more information, talking us through the key ideas. Because again, it's keywords, not full ideas developed on your slides. And one thing you can do to make this a little bit easier is to use the notes function. So if you're in PowerPoint, you go down here to the bottom bit, you've got this notes section, and you can add notes. And then those will be visible to you depending on how you have your thing set up. So my notes aren't visible, that's fine. But you can use that notes function to give yourself additional information. If there's something you want to make sure that you say, specific details like numbers or researched sources, things like this, the notes function is a great way to remind yourself of those specifics. You want to use your best public speaking skills. And this is not fundamentally a public speaking video, but you want to project confidence, you want to speak loudly and clearly, you want to make eye contact with the audience, etc., etc. There's a lot of information out there about good public speaking as well. So that's definitely something you want to practice, because a PowerPoint presentation, the PowerPoint is a tool to help you as a presenter, but it doesn't take the place of a good presentation. So you want to make sure that you are really driving the presentation forward using your public speaking skills. And the last thing is, you want to make sure that you have a plan B. Technology is not as reliable as we often want to think that it is. You should be prepared to present without the PowerPoint if necessary. I've seen a lot of issues where people run into difficulty trying to get a PowerPoint to load, trying to download it, trying to log into their email or Dropbox or something like that. I've seen a lot of issues with people trying to access their PowerPoints or trying to load their PowerPoints or put it on a screen or whatever it is, and it doesn't work. And you end up taking up a lot of time, and audiences get very, very antsy when you're spending a lot of time trying to load a PowerPoint. So you want to be prepared if you're running into issues to just say, I don't need the PowerPoint. I am good enough and I know my material well enough that I can present without it. One thing you can do to minimize the potential complications of not being able to access a PowerPoint, I recommend bringing it on a jump drive or flash drive, a thumb drive, USB drive, whatever you call it. If you bring it on a separate little drive rather than depending on the internet connection, it'll typically be a lot easier to access. The last thing in terms of presenting well with a PowerPoint, and this is my number one piece of public speaking information in general, practice, practice, practice. You should practice your PowerPoint and presentation and what you're going to say a number of times before the actual presentation itself. And if you have a time limit, make sure you practice and you are under that time limit. That's a very, very important thing. Everybody has academic conference stories about somebody who had a 20-minute time slot and went 45 minutes, whatever it is. If you are going beyond the allotted time, you are infringing on other people's time. And that's not professional, it's not polite, and people don't appreciate it. So if you've got a time limit, make sure that your presentation falls within that time frame. And one of the best ways to do that is to practice your presentation so you know how long it takes. Joseph Somerville's 7 Deadly Sins of PowerPoint Presentations. Again, these are not mine, these are Joseph Somerville's. I've got the URL where this comes from down here if you really, really wanted to follow this up. But a lot of these I've already covered. So slide transitions and sound effects. This isn't a movie. Let the presentation do its own work. Standard clip art. Again, I talked about that before. Presentation templates. This one I'm more on the fence about. Presentation templates can be really, really useful, but if you just use a general template, and you don't do anything to sort of customize it or improve it, it can say, I just stuck this into a generic template and I don't really care. Text-heavy slides, we talked about before. The me paradigm. This one is more about focusing on building a presentation for yourself than for the audience. Just reading from the slides. Again, this is not an effective technique. You want to make sure that you're elaborating and you're explaining the things that are going on, the things that are listed in keywords, et cetera, on your slides. And then finally, faith in technology. Again, I talked about this one as well. Technology will sometimes let you down, so you want to be careful about how reliant you are on it. Finally, closing. You typically want a closing slide or a couple of slides. You want a thank you slide, thanking the audience for their attention, et cetera, et cetera. Fairly straightforward, standard, easy stuff. And then if appropriate, that should say if appropriate, not is appropriate, proofread, a works cited or bibliography. So if this is a research-based presentation or something like that, and your audience is going to expect a source citations page, you want to make sure that you include that. Otherwise, you can end with the thank you slide. And then you're done.